when the president said he's not scared of boots on the ground, well, it won't be his boots on the ground.
Are they prepared to see the US in a different position that has been for the last century?
People are waking up to this. And I think that they are looking at Cuba probably next. Russians cannot overwhelm Ukrainian defenders. I mean, after 12 years, Russia still only controls 20% of Ukraine and is not going to get any significantly better. Angela, the former Bundeskanzler Merkel, she makes no apologies. Okay, so she's not going to all of a sudden say, oh, I was wrong. I'm inspired by Ukrainian courage and tenacity, and I think Russia's in trouble.
A quick reminder that you're watching How Come, and I'm its host, Anastasiia Marushevska. Please subscribe to our channel. It will help a lot for us to record future interviews and take a closer look into issues that shape our world. Today we're talking to Ben Hodges. He is the former commanding officer of US Army Europe and someone who has helped many of us to make sense of what's happening in the world through his meaningful commentary on Russia's war against Ukraine and on the roles of the United States and Europe in this process. Welcome, Ben, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to start with, I guess, something that you probably have been asked in the past several days many times, that everyone has been following what's happening in Venezuela. And after American operation capturing Maduro, and Donald Trump said that the US gonna run Venezuela in between, somehow temporary. How do you assess this move? Do you have kind of an idea of what Washington is trying to achieve with this?
I think that the easy part, toppling Maduro, has been done. I mean, that it was well done by the military and the intelligence, I had no doubt, but that's the easy part. Now the hard part is, what do you do? Why did we do it? What's the end state? And based on everything I've heard and thought about the last 48 hours, it's not clear to me that they have got it planned out what they're going to do. It sounds like they plan to use leverage over what's left of the regime with the vice president, who I guess now is the president, is Rosado, and to put pressure on them to do what the administration wants. Now, this is, this seems to me to be wrong in so many different ways, and we'll see how it plays out as the Congress begins to get involved. But it has the feeling of something that could be a real problem for us for a long time, a quagmire. When the president said he's not scared of boots on the ground, well, it won't be his boots on the ground. I mean, what is the purpose of if you're going to put soldiers there? So I'm not impressed so far in a positive way with what they're doing. But this, of course, is only a step. This is about oil. This has nothing to do with drugs. And I think that they are looking at Cuba probably next. Cuba and depends on Venezuelan oil. And Cuba had thousands of their own people in Venezuela providing most of the security for Maduro. Several Cubans were killed in the attack the other night. But it's hard to know, or it's hard to say who's really in charge of things in Venezuela. You have military, you have police, you have drug gangs, you have Cubans. Who's loyal to who? I don't know yet.
Jan, you've been commenting on this US national security strategy that was published in November, and it explicitly says that the US sees a Western Hemisphere as its sphere of influence somehow. How do you, in general, see the shift in foreign policy that the Trump administration kind of highlighted in this strategy, and what it means both for Latin America, we discussed a little bit, but what it means for Europe.
So the national security strategy seems to imply that the U.S. will be the dominant force in the Western Hemisphere. So kind of an old 18th century construct of spheres of influence. Um, it it implies that Europe is on its own. In fact, this strategy talks about Western democracies in Europe as the biggest threat. It barely even mentions Russia at all, certainly not as a threat. So the implication is that Europe, you're on your own. Um, and certainly the president has, I think, been pretty, unfortunately, he has taken the Russian or Kremlin side in almost everything over the past year. So, um, I don't know. You don't get a feel for the strategic how the president views the importance of Europe to American prosperity and security, except in a transactional basis. And then with China, um, it's you again. You get the feeling that the president has told Xi, "That's yours, your sphere, as long as you don't interfere with our trade and our commerce and our access to critical minerals." So that would tell me that I don't think this administration would go to war over Taiwan, for example.
Yeah, because they mentioned China in the strategy, but it's kind of more of economic, technological competition rather than any type of ideological or military. I want to ask, I think, this question that has been on the mind of many, many Europeans, and I guess on your mind as well, is actually, does Europe understand what this strategy means? Are they prepared to see the US in a different position that has been for the last century?
I think that people are waking up to this. I mean, there's been disbelief that the United States, after all these decades of what we've done, and never perfect, but always represented, the liberal democratic values, and cared about the security of Europe. This administration and the people that support it have seemed to be from a completely different philosophy. And so I think, obviously President Zelensky is not confused, but I think that uh, leaders of Germany, Poland, France, UK, Netherlands, Denmark, other older European countries are like, holy hell, this is it's different. And so they are absolutely going to have to acknowledge that they're going to have to deal with Russia as a threat without the assumption of a strong American participation or presence. Now, to be candid, they ought to be able to do this. If you add together the populations, the wealth, the technology, the military, the industry of all of the countries of the EU, plus UK, plus Canada, plus Norway, plus Ukraine, it there's it dwarfs Russia. There's no way that Russia should be able to threaten. But this would require nations really working together and understanding that Russia is at war with them, even if they're not launching Kinzhal missiles against other European cities.
Yeah, I see. This was actually one of my questions that I think Trump and Europeans themselves often forget what Europe is capable of. Somehow it has been ruling not necessarily in a good way, but it has created biggest wars, biggest colonizations, and you can see that there is a lot of potential, military, industrial potential. But you mentioned a little bit that it requires more cooperation, more unity. But what's, I think this is a question that everyone has on their mind. What's blocking them from actually seeing an urgency in this? Because we can see they're talking about preparing their defense, that in 10 years, their defense is going to be stronger. but the war is happening now. What's blocking them from actually doing this a little bit step further?
I think there's, first, they're still, in disbelief. They can't believe that this is actually in the year 2025, 2026, that you have this massive war in Europe and that it presents a real threat to people that live in Italy, Spain, Greece, France, Denmark. They can't believe it. And so politicians, political leaders are slow to make the case, to explain what the threat is and why to prevent that war, you have to show that you're prepared for it. Now, the Russians, of course, have for years have been building their own influence in these countries through money, through corruption, through dependence on Russia for energy. So um, it's taking time to get disconnected from that Russian influence. And of course, you must know that there are many right-wing parties in European countries that are either pro-Russia or anti-Ukraine or are isolationists. And in fact, the Trump administration has reached out to them, like AfD, for example, in Germany. But it's not only there; it's in UK, in France, in Italy, um, where you've got a real internal debates about the EU, about NATO, about Russia. So all of these things contribute to a lack of urgency by European leaders. And I think, it's going to take a few. You're not going to get everybody, but a few who are not confused to do what's necessary, and then perhaps others will come along. That's the way it's always been in history.
Where you mentioned the Germany and this dependence, for example, on Russia, and I was thinking, like, having this feeling that there was no accountability for the policies that kind of brought Russia on international stage. Even when they were attacking other countries like Georgia, when they attacked Crimea, they're still, like, especially Germany was bringing Russia onto, like, being a partner, being business partner. Um, but I have not heard much accountability for these wrongful policies. Do you think we Europeans actually need to have this conversation of understanding who made a mistake, what mistakes there was, and to move forward from this?
Well, I don't know what sort of accountability you're talking about. I mean, you know, everybody had their hands on this. I mean, governments in most European countries that believe somehow that Russia could be a partner, that we didn't need to have strong military, and certainly Germany was depending on cheap Russian energy all the way up until late in 2021. But they're not alone. Other countries is similar. I mean, you have huge amounts of Russian money in London. That's why they called it the London Oblast. You've got Switzerland, Austria, you've got big Russian money all over Italy and France. So I don't know that there's value in chasing that down. What's more important is that the energy of leaders is to help their populations to recognize the threat and that Russia is at war with us, and that this is not just about Ukraine, but it's about Russia continuing its efforts to regain territories that it feels it should not have lost with the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but here, I guess when I'm talking about accountability, this is not like legal proceedings, but more understanding which policies were incorrect and which should
Yeah.
be
Okay. Well,
worked
look,
for.
Angela, the former Bundeskanzler Merkel, she wrote her book. She makes no apologies. Okay. So she's not going to all of a sudden say, oh, I was wrong. But of course, she was not the first. There were people before her and around her that also supported this, that believed in this policy of working with Russia through trade as a way to bring about normalized relations. And I've heard and seen where German politicians today say, "Okay, we were wrong." So there is an understanding of that, and Merkel's legacy has been severely damaged. So in a way, maybe that's the accountability you're talking about.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you don't think that Zelensky is fooled by kind of Trump's narratives and his approach. In Ukraine, there is a lot of debates of how Ukrainian government actually communicates this peace deal to Ukrainians, because there is, again, Trump talks about it, our government, Ukrainian government talks a lot about it, and it creates this anticipation in people, like something is coming, when in reality, nothing is coming fast. But you believe that Zelensky actually understands this process and he just plays along?
Well, I wouldn't say play along, but he's in obviously a very difficult position. I think he understands that the U.S. is not going to resume doing what it was doing under the Biden administration, for example. But um, he certainly would not want the U.S. to stop all aid, to stop other countries from providing American-made equipment, for example. So he has to. I think he has. Of course, this is my own analysis. I don't know this, but he is. Acting in good faith in a negotiating process to keep the U.S. involved, keep the Trump administration involved. And I think also there are some European countries that would run if they thought that the Ukrainian side was not seriously looking for a negotiated outcome. So this shows good faith to other European countries. But I think, your president and most Ukrainians are not fooled or confused by who the Russians are, what they're doing. They're not deceived that somehow Russia would all of a sudden live up to an agreement if it was not forced on them. And so, I think President Zelensky is having to manage all of these things at a time under enormous pressure.
And I wanted to ask about peace deal, of course, yeah, more. What we see, of course, that Russian side is not really interested in all of this. How do you evaluate it? How do you see whether Russia has any interest in actually engaging in genuinely engaging in peace negotiations?
Russia has zero interest in engaging in a just, sustainable, negotiated settlement that would be acceptable to Ukraine or to other European countries. They have never backed off of their maximalist demands, and I don't think anybody should be confused that somehow they really just want to have peace, because that's obviously not the case. So I think that interestingly, at least, uh, I think Putin continues this as long as he thinks he can win, which means that the rest of us will quit. That Europe will quit, and they'll say, "Hey, bad luck, sorry, Ukraine," or that even Ukrainians would quit. So, because he doesn't care about casualties, and the whole economy, he doesn't care about whether or not people are happy with their own economy, as long as he can keep paying for the war. Um, I think that that stops when he's no longer able to export oil and gas to China and India and other customers to pay for this thing, which is why I think what Ukraine is doing now to go after Russia's oil and gas infrastructure is exactly the right approach, to prevent them from being able to export the oil and gas to their customers. I think it's clear that the Russians cannot overwhelm Ukrainian defenders. I mean, the year 2025, Russia gained point 0.8 of 1% of Ukrainian territory with 400,000 casualties. I don't see that changing in the coming year. And this year, it's gonna be the same type of awful, attrition, but the Ukrainians seem to me to have made the right sort of adjustments. Um, Now, the thing, of course, that is difficult for Ukraine defenses to stop is to protect the cities and innocent people from these constant attacks. Um, so that's that's going to continue, I'm guessing. So that's kind of the three things. You get Russian air attacks will continue against civilian targets. That's terrible, but that's not decisive. You're not going to win the war like that. Russia cannot win the war like that. On the ground, Ukraine has stopped Russia, and I think probably feels confident that even though this is terrible fighting and Ukrainian casualties too, after 12 years, Russia still is only controls 20% of Ukraine, and it's not going to get any significantly better. And then the third part is, of course, what I mentioned, Ukraine attacks on Russia's oil and gas exports, the refineries, the terminals, the shadow fleet vessels, all of this. That's to me, that's the path, the theory of victory.
Yeah, and you talked a lot also because now Ukraine is attacking oil refineries and the shadow fleet. And you mentioned a lot of times that you believe that sanctions, strong sanctions against Russia, is one of the ways to actually pressure and to kind of bring this war to the end. How do you think the kind of the perfect situation in which sanctions are enforced to the highest level can look like?
Well, that's the key is enforcement. It's not that we need more sanctions, so we need to enforce the law already. And there's too many places where even American companies, but not only American companies, components find their way through India into Russian weapons, for example. But there are European countries as well that where companies are violating some of the sanctions. We learned just a few months ago that there were the Danish company was doing maintenance on Shadow Fleet vessels, and a Lithuanian company was refueling Shadow Fleet vessels. I was like, how can that be happening? Um, the European countries around the Baltic Sea have got to work, use the international law and prevent Russia from being able to just sail Shadow Fleet vessels in and out of the Baltic Sea. I mean, this requires political will, and it's hard. It's not easy to do. But if we're serious about it, these are the kind of things you have to do. And by choking Russia's ability to export oil and gas is how you suffocate them or starve them of the resources they need to continue the war.
Yeah, and in his New Year appeal, Chancellor Merz talked about that Germany is almost under daily attacks of Russia, which means cyber attacks, sabotage. And you can hear this over and over again that European leaders actually saying that Russia is a threat. But it feels like sometimes to me that this idea is lost somewhere in between them communicating with actually their people in the countries.
I would just say we're gonna hear and see a lot more about this in the coming weeks. I mean, um, most Germans are not at home right now. They are gone over the holidays. They're gone. Businesses are closed in most places, schools. So I anticipate in the coming weeks this this all picks back up, and it will become much more in the forefront of the public debates and what's going on when the Bundestag is back and media is back and people stop talking about Trump and Venezuela and terrible fire in Switzerland, but instead get focused on the big issues affecting Germany. Uh, then I think we'll know more.
Yeah. And do you think that other countries, because we know that there is coalition of the willing, there is also countries which are much more outspoken, such as the Baltic states or the Nordic countries. But whom do you see needs to lead this process in Europe?
And it's got to be Germany. Germany is the only country that has the wealth, the population, the size, the geography, the real clout. And you've got a leader now with Friedrich Merz who understands all that. And so I think he's capable of doing it. I think President Macron would like to, but he's in such a difficult domestic situation. Same with Starmer in UK. Fortunately, President Stubb of Finland, he's not confused. And you're right, the Nordic countries, um, I think they're going to be very important part of this. And then, of course, Poland. So there's enough countries with real capability, real wealth that could help change things, particularly all those around the Baltic Sea. So but it really does depend on German leadership, particularly in the absence of a reliable American leadership.
Yeah, and in Ukraine, Germany is within European countries. Germany is the biggest supporter of Ukraine, both militarily and economically. So, we can talk a lot how it's not enough done, but at the same time realize how actually Germany and Europe in general is holding Ukraine somehow, not just militarily, but in many other spheres. And um, following up these kind of Nordic countries and someone who takes more responsibility, you spent a big part of your career working with NATO, and again, there is a lot of comments on what NATO is now, but we all understand how it managed for decades and decades actually to keep peace between the countries that are members. But
Right.
do you think, how do you see it in the future? Should Europe build kind of its separate security organization, or should NATO somehow adapt to new realities?
I think that, and this has to be my last question, okay?
Yeah.
Um, I think that most European countries are hoping that the United States does not withdraw from NATO or whatever, but I think this administration is going to have a much less active role inside NATO, perhaps. Um, I think it would not be you, you don't want to recreate NATO without the U.S. I mean, you have an existing structure, headquarters, people, processes that works very well. Um, but I do see the value of some sub-NATO groupings like the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is the UK plus all the Nordic and Baltic countries, for example. That's a real capability. Represents a lot. So there could be things like this that would be able to maybe do conduct operations outside of NATO, but I I think the creation of something new, a new organization is not what's needed. What's needed is political will.
You know, everyone builds predictions for 2026. I wanted to, because you spent all your life in military, how do you see a situation on the front line changing in 2026? Do you see big shifts?
No, I'm inspired by Ukrainian courage and tenacity, um, and I think Russia's in trouble. Um, I don't see Russia having the ability to do anything more than what they're doing right now. So, if Ukraine can continue to reduce its own casualties and improve its manpower situation, I think, a year from now, the situation on the ground is going to look about like it does now. Um, but hopefully, we'll see dramatic reductions in Russia's ability to continue attacking Ukrainian civilians.
Thank you so much, Ben. Sorry for the inconveniences, and thank you so much for talking to me. And Happy New Year again.
Thank you very much, and best wishes to you and your family and all your
Yeah,
colleagues.
thank you so much to you as well. Bye bye. We talked with Ben Hodges about what's happening in Venezuela and why Trump administration is actually doing what they do. And we also discussed what's happening on the front line in Ukraine and what are his predictions for 2026. Please watch our short conversation with Ben Hodges, who is a great supporter of Ukraine and a commentator who helped many of us to decipher what's actually happening in the world. Please watch the interview on Ukrainian English YouTube channel, and thank you for supporting us.